My mission is to teach history through art and to make people think more critically about false narratives. I'm Jim McMurtry, and welcome to my classroom. The painting we are looking at today is on Pocahontas. It was commissioned in 1870. And the question we have is this painting accurate, or is another example of a false narrative? And that's the hard thing for us to try and determine what really happened back in the past. The word history itself, if you look closely at it, has the word story in it. And sometimes you wonder if there's more story than fact in history. And looking at the painting, you can see there's 7 people and they all look European. So this painting was probably done. This was certainly done by a European, and but did not capture the obviously the characteristics of people who would have long ago migrated from Asia. Another error would be in how colorful the clothing is, because the clothing is yes, Aboriginal Indigenous people had access to colors through clay, minerals, plants, and so forth, but they wouldn't have been that vivid. So there's that. There's teepees in the back left part of the picture. So they didn't have teepees in Virginia. We'll come back to where this story takes place on the eastern coast of the United States. And as well, you can look at the battle axe and you can see that it looks like metal. And of course, the Native people didn't have metal. Therefore, so there, what do we know about Pocahontas? I guess what we know about it is the Disney films, but she's not as she's portrayed in the films. One thing about Pocahontas is that she married 3 times. She had 2 children and was dead at 21. It's a different Pocahontas. Did she love? Did she fall in love with John Smith? Did she save his life? That's the main part of the story. That there's this remarkable princess, the daughter of the most important person in the Powhatan tribe. His name himself was eponymous. His name himself was the same, Powhatan. And he had many wives and many children. Therefore, Pocahontas was good with children because she had many younger brothers and sisters to nurse. So just coming back again to the idea of history, the most important people in history probably include Jesus Christ. And Jesus, what we know of his life was documented by 4 biographers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And none of those 4 biographers ever met Jesus. What we know about Muhammad and what's in the Quran comes from a meeting he had with an archangel named Gabriel. But we don't really know Muhammad met an angel in a cave. And so history, again, is interesting in that way, because it is full of mystery. And maybe in some ways we learn or know more about it the further we get away from it. And I would say that the first thing we need to know was Pocahontas wasn't her name. Her name was Amanute, and Pocahontas means the playful one. It was a nickname. She had another nickname, Matoka. Obviously, she was popular and she was important, and she had influence, and that relates to, again, to the central part of the story, which is that she did something really heroic for a girl, and that is that she stories vary, but generally what you hear is that she put her head down on top of John Smith's head before his brains were about to be bashed out with a war club, and said that if they were going to kill him, they had to kill her first. And there's nothing to indicate that this isn't true. But the story comes from, it's only from one source, and that source is from John Smith himself, who wrote about his adventures. And he was a fascinating man. John Smith was someone who was a soldier of fortune, for a time a pirate. When he was in the Mediterranean fighting in behalf of Germany, knowing Back in time as the Holy Roman Empire, he was captured by Muslim Turks and imprisoned. And that's interesting because when he meets Pocahontas, he also at one point is imprisoned and again condemned to death and saved by her. Um, so the story takes place in it says in Virginia. And Virginia comes to us because it's a name given in honor of because when the early Europeans came over, they of course claimed all of this land that was inhabited, but they didn't consider it to be legally occupied. So they claimed it in the name of their king or queen. In this case, the queen at the time for the Brits was Elizabeth I, and she never married, so they called her the Virgin Queen. She had many boyfriends, many men that sought after her. So you can decide for yourself whether the her title is an accurate one. The thing that I kind of find fun for me, this is a personal thing, is the story of North America and its colonization begins in Virginia because the very first settlement in Canada, the first settlement was in 1608, Quebec City, but in the U.S. and all of North America, it was in 1585, and it was called the Lost Colony. Not at the time, but it became lost and disappeared. And the first permanent settlement was in 1607, and it's still around, in Jamestown, Virginia. And but the Lost Colony was founded by a British um, uh, maybe he too could be called a pirate because he would certainly set on Spanish galleon ships full of gold and silver and other treasure. But his name was Sir Walter Raleigh, and he was a favorite of the Queen, and my middle name is Walter, so we'll always remember about Sir Walter Raleigh. Most of the people in his first colony didn't make it through the winter, or certainly a vast majority. And that's the story, really, of early colonization, that it was hard and many people didn't survive. And in the very first one, nobody survived that we know of. But there are reports of people being seen decades later, young adults with gray eyes. And so there was a myth that's built around that some of the people must have survived and intermixed with the Powhatan and other indigenous tribes in the area. So likely, again, they didn't all die. And it just shows once again that the story, our story of Canada, of North America, of the New World, called the Americas after a map maker named Amerigo Vespucci, worked with the Spanish and early explorers. But the story is one that's very much one of intermixing, one of contributions by people from all over the world, and in particular by indigenous people. So that's all I'd like to say for today. And I don't think Pocahontas would be remembered 440 odd years later, or not 440, maybe closer to 410 years later. If she hadn't, if she died again, 1621, I don't think she'd be remembered if she weren't somebody who was extraordinary.